All right, several hours have passed and I've done more refining on the shape here. And I'm at the point now where every time I do one of these things, and I've probably made maybe 30 of these in my lifetime, pretty much one a year since I started. And every one turns out different, even though in this case I was following this one as my guide. In the process of doing it and looking back to the original photograph, things changed, and it's just, it gets to the point where you have to almost abandon it, and aesthetically you can really get roped into trying to make every subtle nuance of this work, and it just gets to a point where you have to say good enough. In this case, I'm pretty happy the way this one came out. I really like the aesthetic on that, and I was trying to go for something that my frame, since I'm an average size guy. This one I found I really liked. It was very heroic proportions, but maybe a little too hourglass. Was actually fairly uncomfortable for me to wear. So someone with a very lean waist maybe, but I wanted to this one a little more forgiving, I suppose. Look back at this one, which I did many years ago, and I really like this one, but this one's much more stylized. This one we're doing here is much more anatomically correct. But having said that, it's still stylized. I consider every sculpture stylized to a certain extent. The actual working with a certain medium and trying to replicate living flesh, there's always going to be a translation there, and that, you know, I just call that being stylized. So it's not completely like a human form, but this is pretty damn good, I think, and I'm fairly happy with how I've got this all tucking in here. Again, I talked earlier about this being really the hardest part to try to achieve this, is the compound curve, trying to get everything to go in there and flow out. Metal doesn't want to conform that way, but I think this one is forming on pretty good. Everything falls into place fairly nicely there. I find the 6-pack is relatively easy to do, and in this case, based on the original there, it's actually not overly defined. It's this whole area, the serratus, that is subtle and very hard to try to figure out what is actually going on there and get that to work. And you're trying to create something that is very aesthetically formidable, I guess is the word I'm looking for. That's kind of what the whole aspect of these things were, kind of an in-your-face intimidation factor of having this muscular guy coming at you. So trying to get something that has the most heroic form possible. Like, that's where you want to have, you know, the gut sucked in, that kind of whole idea there, and then a little bit of definition in the serratus. Same time, I don't really like a fully shredded, like say a bodybuilder that was at 5% body fat, you know, then everything is sticking out there. To me, that looks a little bit, I don't know, overdone. I like the subtlety of this, something a little bit more like me as a natural, I don't, 15% body fat, 18%, something like that. I think works a little bit better as a historical model, and it actually fits quite well with the piece that we're basing this on. So anyway, I'll show you briefly what I was doing in far as trying to get this sort of stuff in here. Just trying to get this subtle different landmarks and things like that. So just zoom in here on my steak. All right, so for example, when I'm doing this center line here, I go to my handy ball stake here and just position the abs over there, and then just come in like that. Same thing down in these valleys here, is just getting it positioned over the ball and knocking those in. Now, getting your little bulges coming out there is one thing, but sometimes you have to change the plane. For example, in here, I needed to drop this piece down. So what I actually did was, on this piece here, I put it onto a ball, and then I have this piece sitting up in the air. And once you have that, it's hitting down on the flat, I push this entire bulge and drop it down a level. And when you do that, then you have to go back and refine the distortions and stuff like that. But in that way, you're able to take things and push them where they need to be, and trying to get that hourglass indent in here, which is so critical. Very subtle stuff, and this is where, if you don't have an artistic bent, this is where people are going to really be struggling. This is not a paint by numbers recipe sort of approach to something. You have to have a pretty good picture in your mind's eye of what you're doing sculpturally in order to be able to even see and discern the subtle distinctions that make this work. It's good to have a good model or example to work off of, but if you're not that sort of artistic personality, then this is probably not the thing for you. You're going to struggle with this. You can learn all the techniques and everything like that, but to do some of the subtle sculpturing might be a bit of a struggle. Anyway, I'm assuming that people who are going to be trying this have some sort of creative artistic bent and will try their best and see what happens. So once I reach this point, I can still see a lot of irregularities and things like that, and this all gets planished out on the little balls, on the big balls, stuff like that, and basically you just move around. And you can spend hours just kind of pushing things down. Then you got to watch that as you're doing that, that you're not bulging a area out or flattening out an area that needs to be sculpted. So it's something that is really quite exhausting when it gets to this point. Everything is so subtle and it takes a lot of focus to make sure you're on the right track. And the planishing could go on indefinitely. It's kind of, planishing is always just abandoned. It's never done. So you get to a point and you just say, fuck it, you know, I got to move on. We're going to polish this, or actually grind it with sanding discs and things like that to bring it down, and I want to leave some hammer texture in. But anyway, moving on. All right, so I decided I want to Greek this thing up with some decorative Repoussé stuff. So I went on Google, as I typically do, and got some motifs, and I kind of like this stylized bull head. And bull motifs feature very heavily in Greek art. Also, this little decorative band motif, which is similar to what I did on the Greek shield, slightly different variation of it, but I thought, you know, this will be, you know, really add a little bit of Greek flair to it. I'm not going totally historically accurate on it, but I think it's really going to have, at least these are both historically accurate motifs, and I'm putting it on here. I think it will come up with something aesthetically quite lovely. So anyway, draw this out, scaled it up to what I wanted there, drew this to everything fits there, and then I went and transferred it onto my transfer paper. Did the one side there, which I can now flip over and do the other side there. So this will give me my point of reference. So what I need to do first is actually pound out a little bulge here. I'm going to anneal that. I should mention, I haven't annealed this thing in quite a while, and doing all the planishing and fine tuning on this, it has work hardened quite a bit, and I'm very pleased. This is actually work hardened quite a bit more than when I work with brass. I haven't worked with silicone bronze too much to realize that, but I think this stuff is probably going to be pretty durable and tough. So I've kind of left it. I would have liked to anneal it again to be able to move things nicer, but I wanted it to work hardened so that this thing is actually going to function as a piece of armor. But up here I'm going to have to anneal because I need to get this nice and soft to be able to work with it. So anyway, so I'm just going to position this on here. You can see the way I've done my funky little cutout here. And I just want to get my bull lined up on my center line. Trace him out, flip it over. All right, that just gives me a rough silhouette of where I'm going there. Now I want to jump over to my shot bag and put a little bulge in there to replicate that. All right, so what I've done now is just pounded out roughly a raised area of what I'm going to be working with my Repoussé, and I wanted to get some depth there because I like high relief. When I do it, I want it to stand out. So just basically roughing out that perimeter there. Now I can get the pitch in behind there and start working in Repoussé fashion to sharpen all that up. So I'm gonna go over to the forge. First I'm gonna anneal this whole thing, and then I'm gonna heat it up to put the pitch in. So I've got the heat off actually. They're just sitting on the forge, just as low a heat as I can. I don't wanna overheat the pitch, and I'm just adding chunks in and letting it melt in there, and then removing it from the heat when I bubbling too much and just trying to get my little depression filled up. I can only work with a little bit of the area at a time, so I'm not going to do the side wings there. Not sure if the camera's picking all this up, but anyway. And there we have it. I think I'm just going to let that sit now for about 15 minutes. Okay, I think that will represent the first pass there. I've got the bullhead roughed out. Now I want to move on and get my decorative border motif in there. So I'm going to shift it onto my holder here. And then I can, first of all, maybe I will draw that out and then get both of these sides just roughed in. And then I think I'll probably have to anneal again. Things are starting to work hard in a bit. All right, I know what you're thinking. Ugh, that doesn't look very good. Got a long way to go on this. I just did this. There was no backing in there, no pitch behind there. So I was just caving this in to establish my lines here. I'll pop this off and then work from the inside and pop up my little ridges there and then go back in with some pitch and do that. So right now I'm gonna get going on the other side here, but I don't think you need to see all this. This is going to take me several hours now. We'll just jump ahead, come back and watch me as I do the finishing touches on this. So I'll see you later. All right, 4 hours has elapsed since we last spoke and the Repoussé has basically been finished. I've got my little motif here with my bullhead and my motif coming up around the side there. I'm quite happy with that. Before I forget, I just want to point out something. Here is an annealed piece of bronze, and if you listen to that, if you listen to this, quite a bit difference, and that is work hardening. And I left, especially this part down here, let that work harden up quite a bit at the end, and it was actually getting difficult to move it around. Really got quite rigid as to where I wanted to be, but I wanted to do that work hardening to create the functionality of the best potential for this piece of bronze as a piece of armor. And that brings me to my next thought, functional sculpture. And that's kind of my big thing. That's what I'm really into, is functional sculpture. And more or less, I think that everything I make, I consider to be functional sculpture. You know, whether it's a range hood or a gate or a piece of armor or whatever. I think of it as both something that is functional and sculptural, and I really like the marriage of those two things. This, I think, by the most rigid definition, falls into functional sculpture. Like there's really no denying it. It's functional, it's a piece of body armor that will protect the body and actually save somebody's life. So there's no denying that it's functional, and there's also no denying that this is a piece of sculpture. It's basically an extension in space. It is sculpted in the likeness of the human form. So for me, this kind of thing really ticks all the boxes. This is the kind of stuff that I get excited about making, and I've done maybe 30 of these in my lifetime, and every time it's a fully engaging process for me. It really kind of sucks me in I think, you know, one of the buzzwords right now is deep work, and also they talk about mindfulness. This is it right here for me, because it pulls me right in. This is my entire world as I'm working on this, and really mentally, physically, spiritually, you know, whatever, it taxes me to the utmost to get this, but this is the kind of stuff I really like to do. This is my crack cocaine, if you will. This here is Thak crack. So there you have it. Now, talking sculptural wise, my next step here is to do the finish on it. I was going to do a finish like this breastplate here, my brass one, where I was going to take some grinders and mechanical polishing equipment and smooth out a lot of the bumps here, just leaving some of the hammer marks in the crevices. But looking at this thing as I finished it off, I just like all the hammer marks in it, and I just think, you know, I'm really kind of in an artistic frame of mind at this point, and I'd like to see if I can finish it retaining all the planished hammer marks in there. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So we're just going to jump right into the finishing process here. What I need to do is get some gun blue on, which is a weak nitric acid solution. And what that's going to do is darken this whole thing up, but it's also going to eat through the soot and stuff that is here from being into the forge. And then I'm going to be able to get the whole thing kind of darkened down, and then I will be able to buff out the highlights using a combination of steel wool and sandpaper. So I'm just going to do some quick hand finishing on this, see how it comes out. I'm not sure. I've done this in the past. The contrast when it freshly happens is not, it's a little too stark, a little too startling for me, but I'm just going to see how it goes. Incidentally, in the future video, we'll be doing the back plate for this piece here anyway, so I'm not too concerned about having this finished to a pristine finish, because when I do that, I'm going to be using this piece to work the other piece, and then when I get the two of them done, I may do a final finish on everything. But enough chit chat here, let's get right into the actual finishing. Before I do that, like I said, it's gonna be different than this one here. If you look at the steel one here, this one I actually did, and I used a textured hammer to put pits in this one. I wanted it to be patinaed, and I've had this one for several years now, and I polished it a few times and then let it rust out, and then it's just slowly darkening up, and I really kind of like that look on the steel. I think that's really kind of an attractive aesthetic on there. Also, while I've got the steel and the bronze here, this one, I just put it on the scale, 4.5 pounds for this piece. The bronze breastplate is about 5 3/4 pounds. So bronze being heavier than steel, but not twice as heavy as I was kind of thinking. It felt really quite a bit heavier, but it's actually not that much, only a pound and a bit more. So bronze is always going to be heavier than steel given the same surface area. All right, let's get started. So I'll be using the Birchwood Casey Super Blue gun bluing, and if you guys are interested in getting some gun bluing, then we have an affiliate link, should be somewhere apparently on the video here. But check that out if you want to help support the channel. If you could get it through us, that would be great. So check that out. All right, so I'm just gonna brush on a liberal coat of gun blue here. All right, I'm going to go now dip this in water to neutralize the effect of the acid. Putting on a dust mask. Copper-based alloys in fine powder are fairly toxic and something you want to avoid. Okay, so I'm just, while it's still wet, I'm just rubbing it down with the steel wool here to get that residue off, but I'm leaving the crevices dark. I find when it's wet like this, the water helps diffuse things and you get a nice, a less scratchy finish on it. And there it is. That was about 10 minutes of coarse steel wool while wet, and I really, really like the way the finish has come out on there, and I think it's really coming along quite nicely. I'm very pleased with that. So excited now to be able to make the back plate and get these two the two pieces together and that whole effect. I think it's going to be quite nice. Just a cool thing by way of comparison there. Let's take a look at the brass breastplate and just the difference in the tone of the metal. Also, you can see where I left the hammer marks in here and everything. I think it worked. I like the effect of it. I like the rusticness of this and the way it plays out here. I still like this one. I think it's great. But you know, the comparison from the yellow to that, and if I just grab a piece of copper by comparison, which I just quickly buffed up there, you can see hammered copper, the tone of copper, and then brass, and then bronze laying somewhere in the middle there. I just, to me, bronze is such a gorgeous hue. I just like that. To me, it's a very magical metal. I really like that. Anyway, get Eric to pan around on that while I give you some specs here for all the history nerds. So I think, it wasn't keeping total track, about 22 or 24 hours to make this piece from start to finish, where we are right here. As I think I said earlier, the weight on this is about 5 3/4 pounds at this point, without any of the attachments on there. So it's fairly heavy in comparison to steel, but not too much more. So just to recap the entire process here just quickly. So we started out, I cut out my piece of bronze, I annealed that, and then I dished it into my shot bag, and then worked from the inside. Then I worked on stakes from the outside using both wooden and steel hammers, and there was a lot of back and forth there. Several times it was annealed. Then I rolled the edges. Then I did my Repoussé bull on there. Then I did the final shaping and work hardening, which is a planishing step where I'm doing hundreds of overlapping blows to kind of refine the shape and at the same time work harden it. And then the finish, which in this case was actually very quick and easy. So this is a breastplate of a Greek hoplite from approximately 500 BC. And in this video, I purposely did not include too much history, as I realized from my Greek shield video that my historical knowledge is spotty at best, and I will get better research info from the viewers, you guys who avidly study Greek history. I'm eagerly anticipating feedback from you guys, the guys with the X's and K's and a whole lot of O's in your names. I'm waiting for you to get back to me with some more history and underpinnings for what's going on here. So don't let me down. It's my intention after that we do the breastplate and backplate that I want to do a Corinthian style helmet, so do a bronze helmet. Then from there I want to do the greaves, and then after the armor, the spear, the Xiphos sword, I'd like to do that, and then basically make an entire kit for a Greek hoplite. And we're probably talking a couple of years for me able to put this all together. So if you're watching this in real time, you're gonna have to be patient. If you're watching this in the distant future, hopefully you can just jump from video to video and watch the entire process. So that is basically it. We've got lots of other stuff on the go here, so please, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, subscribe now. Check out all the other videos. We're doing a lot of other stuff. If you want to see, we didn't show a whole lot of the Repoussé in this one, but if you look at the Raven Skull video, Repoussé, much more detail as to that process, and we've got tons and tons of other videos that show a lot of the processes that we use here. So please check it out, comments below, all that stuff. This is it. Thak out. See ya.